I took a photo of some flowers that I had in a windowsill one day when it was raining quite heavily. I really liked that look, and I decided to recreate it in a painting, and I knew I wanted the painting to be very highly textured. So I used some of my favorite tools and textures and created a painting to represent what I saw that day, and I'm really, really happy with the turnout of the painting. During the painting, I will post links where you can get the list of materials and you can purchase the finished painting, or you can also get a pattern of the actual layout of the drawing of the flowers itself if you'd like to download that. And you can use that as an outline. Now, when the video begins, I will have already transferred that pattern onto my canvas. Okay, so I have my water. I use acrylic paint, so everything is water-based. And all I need is my water, some paint brushes. I use paper towel to wipe off my brushes with. And I'm going to be using my Permanent Patch 101. And I have more information on that. And again, all of the list of materials and paints and everything on that pattern that's on mugme.com. Now for a palette knife, you can either use a plastic one like this, or you can use a metal one. It just depends on your own personal preference. And what I'm going to do first is lay down my background texture. And pretty much everywhere I don't have something like my plants, although if I get some texture in there, that's okay, because it'll end up looking nice later as part of the plant. But right now I'm just going to be getting background texture. I like to use these plastic type stencils because they're flexible and very easy to use. And the texture mediums that I use wash off really easily. And I can get these in small enough sizes that I can kind of work them around the canvas in various ways. And I can overlap different designs to get completely new looks. And it works really well with my texture, such as this Permanent Patch 101. So to start with, I kind of like that idea of it looking a little bit rainy. And I happen to have a texture with lines coming down, so I thought I would try that one. Now this is not the sandy texture type that I use a lot. I really like the Permanent Patch 102, works the same basic way, but it is has a kind of a gritty finish to it, and that can be very nice as well. So I think this is working out nicely. So I will keep doing this until I have my background done. And all I need to do now is add whatever texture I want on the little pots. And I think I'll just kind of do something like that. If I go outside of it, that's all right, because this is a semi-abstract painting. We want a lot of texture and a lot of interesting things. So here's a close-up of my texture. And you can see with the pots, they each have the two different types of texture. And then the rain looks really nice. Overall, I'm very happy with this texture. And all I used was a Permanent Patch 101 and my plastic palette knife. Okay, now it's probably been actually a couple of weeks since I worked on this. I got busy with some other things. So this is now definitely thoroughly dry, and I can go ahead and paint right over it. And I'm going to use my initial image as a guide, but I will make some changes. And if you haven't already done so, then pause the video and write down this link that I'm showing on the screen right now, because I'm going to be posting the entire list of supplies and paint colors and things that I'm using. I'll show you some things along the way here, but the entire list and write-up will be at that place. And there will also be a link to where you can get the pattern if you'd like to be able to copy the exact pattern. And I don't usually use these paints. This is Deco Art Americana Decor Metallic. I really like the color of it, and I thought that I would try that out. It's different than my usual acrylic paints, but I'm going to try it. So that is this color here, right here, and then I had some basics gray. So the first thing that I need to do though is start putting down my area in the background. I like to work from the back forward, so I will put in the background first and then I'll come back and add my plants. And when I'm finished, I will come back and add in, I'll put a nice gloss varnish over the whole thing. I'm keeping in mind that my colors for the flowers going to be fairly orange tone, so kind of like bringing in a little bit of this brown, and later I can change that up as I feel I need to. But it's burnt sienna is a reddish brown, but it has, to me, it has a bit of gold in it, or a color that goes nicely with gold. Okay, now I have my basic coat down, and as it dries, I'll go back in and fill in places. It tends to kind of sink down into the texture in areas, and when it dries, I can go back and see where I have missed anything. What I'm looking for is any places in the canvas that are showing through. You want to make sure you get a really good coat down. You could even use a stencil brush or some type of a larger brush and put a base coat down of some sort before you start putting your variegated colors. Now looking at it, I can already see some things I don't like this right here it just stands out too much and it'll end up fighting with my flower here. So I'll tone that down. But once my basic coat is down and I have a start on my painting, then I like to put in my subject. And that tells me then what I need to do to fix my background. And I go from the subject to the background and back to the subject again, and just keep doing that and working on certain areas until I feel like it all comes together. But right now I know this is going to be yellow and orange, and there will be different shades of green coming down this way, kind of curve over into this pot here. And so I may want to put a little bit of yellow down on this end. I'll come back later and put some shadow underneath my pots as well, so they don't look like they're just floating there. Now I'm having to be careful to keep my brush out of the blue paint, because if I have yellow with blue, I'll end up with green, and I don't want green down in this area. So the white paint helps it to spread, and it also tones down the color a bit. I think, and I'm throwing in a little bit of the burnt sienna as I go along as well. I'll decide the color of the pots later. Now I'm going to go back and cover some of this before I do any more, so I will switch brushes. Now another thing that I can do when this is drier is I could actually squirt some watered down paint. I can thin it with a medium. So now I'll come back to my flower and I'll make sure to get a good coat down. So at this point in the painting, it doesn't look like a whole lot of anything yet. So you don't want to panic. You have to remember that we're just getting started. So now I'm going to let this dry. Okay, so it's not totally dry yet, but I did finish off the sides and across the bottom. And now I'm going to work on maybe just putting down a first coat of paint for the little pot there. And I'm kind of wanting to bring in a different color, so I'm going to use a couple of shades of purple. And again, I'll use kind of a variegated technique. So I will dip my brush in maybe one shade of purple in one corner, and then the other corner in the other shade of purple. Okay, so when I dipped my brush in two different colors, then I don't know how well it shows there. I'll bring in a close-up later, but it actually lays it down then in the two different colors, and that kind of adds a little bit of variation for you. And I can even throw in a little bit of white, and that adds a bit of interest as well. Now, one thing that I should mention is the light source in this case is out here because this is in a window. So I'll have my shadows of the pots on this side. And if you look at the original image that is on the pattern, and again, you can get a link to that from my website. And I appreciate anybody who purchases anything from me like that, because it all goes right back into my free videos and my free craft and sewing patterns. Now, since this is where the light is, I kind of like that to be just a little bit lighter across there. The light is out here on that side, so I need to maybe lighten that up a little bit there. Okay, I'm just going to show you a few things that I changed. I changed the shape of this pot, and the reason is because the center of the top needs to be even with the center at the bottom, and it appeared to be leaning this way a bit. So I brought this corner out further and came down with that. And then I added a little bit of detail up here on the windowsill just to kind of bring that out a bit, and put a little line across here to make it look like there's a little bit of a ledge there. And some of my rain texture came down over the top of what is to be my windowsill. And rather than try to take it off, I am using it by putting some of the little fern stems down through there. Okay, this has now dried, and I went through and just touched up the background a little bit, using all of the same colors and making sure that the canvas itself was thoroughly covered. And now I'm going to work on my flower, this main flower here, and then I'll work on some of the leaves and things. And the last part of the detail work will be coming in and adding maybe some little highlights to the pots or something. Now, to bring in some texture to cover up this area and make it look more like actual floral, I have mediums that add thickness to acrylic paints, and one of them is the golden heavy gel matte, and another one is the light molding paste, or regular molding paste. All of these work nicely. I recommend that you try each of them and see which one is your favorite. I think for today I will use the molding paste, and this is a light molding paste. So how I work with that is I just take one of my palette knives and I put a little molding paste right onto my plate. So I have my molding paste right here, and I can mix that in with any of the paints. And to work with the little flower petals, I recommend a filbert. You could try a flat brush, but the problem is the flat brush is straight across on the end, and it would be more difficult to get a little curve to it, but you can try either one. So I'm using various shades of yellow and orange, and I also have some yellow ochre. So to mix this together, I'll take a little dab of my molding paste, mix that with the yellow, and then when I put it down, it's thicker. And I can do that with the orange as well. You can pre-mix these. The idea is that it's nice to have that thicker for the texture. So it works kind of like using a heavy body acrylic. Okay, so now I have my basic flower there, I'd like to add something. So at this point, you just kind of play around until you feel like you have enough dimension to your flower that it's, and like all acrylic paintings, it takes several coats. Now I'm going to mention that all of my paintings, unless they're already sold, I do create several paintings for both my YouTube videos and classes that I teach out of my house and ones that I just do for hobby. And several of those paintings will be available on my new website, mugme.com. And the link is posted here. And I'm selling them at a very reasonable rate. It helps me purchase supplies so that I can keep my videos and my free tutorials going. So I appreciate any business that I can get off of that site. I also sell mugs that feature the work of local artists here in Phoenix. And we all appreciate your support. So thank you very much for visiting mugme.com. Okay, now this is not a filbert, it's a flat brush, but it's what I have, so it's what I'm going to be using. So now I'm just mixing a bit of green, also with the same molding paste, so that I can get a little bit of thickness on there. It's not real thick. I could even put the molding paste down first, because I like that so well. I'm going to go ahead and run some down here. The rest of the texture I will put back in the container. Okay, so now you've seen me do it both ways. The first layer I put down the light molding paste mixed already with the color, and then I went over it putting just molding paste down, which now I'll have to come back and paint over. So try it both ways and see which way you prefer. Now I'll let this dry and then I'll come back and paint over it. Okay, while I was waiting for this to dry, and it's still not dry, I decided to tie these two pots together a little bit better. I felt like I liked the fact that I had some other color in the painting, but they just didn't really tie in with anything else. So I took a tiny bit of my white and dabbed it into the blue metallic, and this is a real small outliner brush. It's an 18-0. And this way I can come through, and without it being real obvious, I'm just adding a little bit of the color that is in the background of the painting. And I'm just following over the stencil design that's there. I did it over here and here, and on this side I accidentally got a little bit of yellow in on a few of them, but I like that because again it just sort of ties it all together. So now I really do have to let it dry, and then I can work on my greenery and the yellow flower. Now for these ferns, you don't have to put in a lot of detail, but you have to have just enough that the brain will pick up that it is a fern. And the way that a fern works is there's one stem that comes down like this, and then there are just little dashes of green that are the little tiny leaves that come off both sides. And they get much smaller towards the tip. So the overall effect is that it's whiter up here and it gets really skinny down here. So the way that I do that is I take a little bit of my white, I just dip a small brush, this is a small flat brush, a little bit of white, a little bit of Payne's gray, and a little bit of the green, and I make sure that I have the color that I like. And then I just lay down dashes like that. I start out very small down towards the bottom, and then I get bigger as I go along. And of course this is smaller, so there are areas in there where I just have little dots as I get down here. And on the skinny end you might end up with just a few little dots like this. So any small brush that you have works. And to give it a little bit of dimension, you can have a mix of colors. Like I can come back and pick up a little bit of white and a little bit of green and then go over some spots. Of course this is paper, it's not canvas, it's not looking exactly the same. But this gives you an idea, because when you get down into here, it's going to get very small. And on this side, they are less finished. I have a darker base down, and that is a mix of the Payne's Gray and the Hooker's Green. And I can come back on in this area here and add some highlights later. I may not, though. It depends on what's going on up on top. I don't want too much detail down there. So anything like this, your brain will see that and interpret that as a fern. Okay, now this is fairly dry. If I were to push on these little textured areas, the molding paste isn't completely dried hard. You can actually push it in a little bit. So I'll be careful, but I believe it can be painted now. Now I want to make sure that some of these in the back are lighter in color, because the light is coming through. This is a very rainy day here, but there is light coming from outside the window coming into the room. You could have your light source be from the room side as well, but I think I'm going to highlight some of these that are up on the top here. So I'm taking a little bit of my titanium white and mixing it with my yellow, and that way I can highlight these upper petals. So to get the shading, again, I'm just putting one corner in the white, one corner in a color, and that automatically gives me a bit of shading. So this, again, I'm just at that point where I kind of play with it until I like the way it looks. Okay, we'll let that dry now and move on to these little things here. And my color mix for that is titanium white, Payne's Gray, and Hooker Green. And the reason is because I want this to be a dark stem down here. Now I can work on my ferns. So I'm going to put in my ferns like I showed before. Now for a lot of these little tiny ones down here, I'm just taking a little brush like this and touching it, and then touching it back and forth, almost like a little Z movement, because that's really all the detail that I need. And again, your brain will tell you that that is a fern stem. Now it's good to have a variety of coloring here, and so I'm using my green gold by Golden. I'm using Payne's Gray, I'm using Hooker's Green, I have white on there. Okay, so now I just added a little bit more back up in there. Okay, now I have my favorite little Frazzly brush that I feature in a lot of my videos, and I'm taking just a tiny dab of the green gold and some white, because I just want to add a little bit of highlight here. Don't have to have very much of it, but it gives it just a little bit more dimension. Okay, now I'm ready to varnish the painting. I just did a couple of things that I didn't show in the video. I added some yellow highlighting through here to emphasize this curvature here. Added just a tiny bit of yellow up in here. I put some on this area and a few little spots in the ferns. And the reason I did that is I wanted to keep the eye moving all the way around the painting, and this had kind of disappeared into the background. So as soon as this is completely dry, I will add my varnish, and then when that is finished, I think I'll go back and add a little bit of drips of water. That'll just sort of emphasize some of this texture in the background, just maybe in a few places. This shows a close-up of the painting and the texture, so you can see the yellow highlights a bit better. and you can see the texture better. So overall, I'm very, very happy with how this turned out. When I mentioned adding the drips of water, that is actually going to be a medium. Okay, now the painting is basically finished. The painting itself is done, and I have put on the varnish. And in the information that you can download about this project, I talk more about the varnishing process and what I use. Now, the varnish has dried overnight, actually for maybe a couple of days, and I have decided that I would like to try adding a little drip here and there. So I am using for that a mixture of my gloss medium and varnish, and I put just a tiny tint of that original blue metallic paint that I used in the background. So you can see there's not much tint to it. And then I have one of my handy syringes. You can use a turkey baster or anything like that. I'll suck up just a little bit of the varnish. You can probably just put a little bit of this on a brush. Try that as well. So this is just a bit of the gloss medium and varnish. I don't really want it to be too heavy. I don't want it to go onto my flower. Just kind of gives the idea of drips in the background there. So have a small flat brush or some type of brush handy. The idea is for it to be dripping down the window, and it's actually to be dripping on the outside of the window. So now you can see the drips coming down. So the overall image is actually fairly glossy, not super high gloss, but there is a shine on it. It's glossy, but there's a lot of texture, so it doesn't look like a mirror or anything. It's just very, very interesting. And then these drips will dry just like that. So I'm going to show the link here one more time where you can go get the instructions and the pattern and the list of materials. Thank you for watching my video.